to Season 8, Episode 5 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading George Lakoff's Moral Politics, How Liberals and Conservatives Think, finally getting into really the meat of his book about how he thinks conservatives think about morality, about politics, with the strict father morality is what he calls it. Essentially the idea that, conservatives have like a respect for a firm authority figure. And he says, how do we think about this? What are the linguistic metaphors we use? You have some thoughts about this chapter that you were saying a little bit before we started recording.
Well, before I even get to that, I'm already in a bad mood. I'm in a bad mood from this weekend, and so maybe I just vent at the world and the listener. I'm teaching this class.
Yes,
This completely unrelated for community college, and I'm a full-time lawyer, and so they focus on having lawyers do this as a side gig. So they have one person that's full-time staff who's an attorney too, and then they have everybody else is just adjunct full-time employed attorney somewhere else. You need to do one or two classes, and they're mandating that I do as a condition of keeping to do this thing that I'm kind of wondering whether I even want to keep doing it, but they're mandating I do these classes, these online training classes. Now, a year after I've been there, okay. And they said they may not approve of me continuing as a hybrid, quote unquote, hybrid teacher if I don't do this. So I have to create I had to create this shell class, and then I have to complete these fake assignments, to show that I can make an assignment, which I've been doing for a year now, and I can make a discussion topic in Canvas. But it doesn't say what the discussion topic has to be or the assignment has to be. And so I've done those two things, like 7 sections. And it's just really time consuming. You have to watch the videos. If you skip the videos, that rejects you. So you have to do all this stuff. And so now I'm in the mode where I'm just like, okay, fine. You want me to do an assignment? The assignment is, I did the assignment while I was waiting between Eli's track runs. So he has the first run and like almost the last run. So I'm out there for like 7 hours on a Saturday afternoon. So I get on the internet and I'm doing these stupid assignments. Anyway, so the first assignment was do this assignment as a condition of employment was the topic of the assignment. And then the assignment was waste a beautiful Saturday afternoon completing this assignment, 10 points possible. And then the discussion topic I did yesterday was please discuss whether or not it is a good idea to waste your Sunday evenings completing menial tasks. And so they said, yeah, you had to have prompt them. And using this one article as a basis for the prompts. So the prompts were you have to choose between these two theories of whether you should complete menial tasks on a Sunday evening. The first one was completing menial tasks on a Sunday evening is a platonic ideal of what you should be doing with your free time on a Sunday. The alternative position was doing menial tasks on a Sunday evening are a complete waste of your time and talent. Please discuss. Pick an option and please discuss. Support your view. Anyway, so I haven't been graded yet. But I've seen the rubric and they can't give me but 100% because I've completed the rubric. I'm going to get more and more insulting as we go through these 7 things. It's the only joy of my life. That, and when I got home before this podcast, I had, what are those things? Shoestring potatoes. You remember those things? They're like those dry little potato sticks. That was like the highlight of my day is eating shoestring potatoes. Yeah, I got a night meeting tonight after this thing's over, and I'm gonna get blamed and criticized for things I have no control over. And
well, it's a good that we're now going to discuss for about an hour a book that you are growing to hate, as you told me in all caps yesterday that you're ready to hate the author.
Well, and as a segue, that was actually another thing that was aggravating me because this guy is the most dishonest writer I may have ever read. The way he sets up this particular chapter, we've kind of been alluding to it as we started through this, how he basically defames conservatives and conservative thought. But this at the beginning of this chapter, he's okay. But then as he gets into it further and further, it's like one straw man argument after another. He's building up a fake opponent. To then, and I know he's going to do this, he's going to then criticize the fake aspects of this philosophy and say, well, you believe in Nazism, and so now I have to condemn Nazism. I have to condemn you because you are a Nazi. And we you see the Nazi stuff is coming because you mentioned Nazis in this chapter. Because as we know, Nazis are strict father morality types.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of morality with those Nazis. Yeah, it's just so dishonest. Is that what really bothers me?
His argument
And,
comes down to in this chapter is like, well, conservatives, just want things to be the way that they were because that's the way things were. Like they don't want to change. They just don't have any idea of anything else than the way things were in the past. And he like doesn't have any sort of concept that there's something higher behind, these ideals. Because I think he points out like something about like smoking weed. Like conservatives are
Mhm.
against smoking weed because it's different from the norm, and they don't like
Right.
things that are different from the norm. No, it's like they might be opposed to weed because they don't want people, on drugs all the time, because they
Yeah, yeah,
recognize the effects of drugs. He said, well, they just don't like it because it's outside of the cultural norm, even if it makes that person happy. And it's like, well, what are you talking about?
yeah. We'll get to that. If I can, I have so many comments on this thing. I don't. I can go. I could write a book about this whole chapter. This one chapter. You could write a whole book refuting this nonsense. But let's start off. All right. Let's try to give him a fair shake. This Lakoff
Mhm.
guy, and his last name is half right. The lake is false.
I understand what you're saying. That's a great
Anyway, so he's this chapter he's talking about the strict father morality. So his argument in this entire book is that there's like a duality. There's two types of moral philosophies in the United States of America. One is the strict father jackasses, and the other is the nurturing mother guardian angels.
Mhm.
He doesn't say that they're jackasses. He implies it throughout this entire chapter. So, what is the strict father family? The strict father model, this first page of chapter 5, the strict father model takes as background the view that life is difficult and the world is fundamentally dangerous. Well, that is true. Okay, that's fundamentally true, but he acts like that it's not true. He doesn't say it's not true. But anyway, so then he quotes Oliver North. I don't even know if you know who Oliver North is.
I do not.
The leftists hated Oliver North. Oliver North, it was a major figure in the Reagan Iran Contra affair. So for the listener out there that wasn't alive during the Iran Contra affair, this is where Nicaragua had a communist leadership, and so the Reagan administration was supporting the Contras, who were so-called freedom fighters. I think they're all just probably killers, and so the Congress cut off funding. So the Reagan administration, I think, his way it went down is they sold arms to Iran,
Mm.
also illegally, and then used that money directly to pay the Contras. So that's why the Iran Contra affair. Well, Oliver North was like a really strong personality. Like he's like straight out of a typecast military veteran, but he's a military. And he worked in the White House, and I think he helped set up this whole thing. And he was just unapologetic, and he was just, I'm a patriot, and I don't care what you say. We're gonna fight these commie bastards. I mean, that's I'm paraphrasing, and we did everything that's right, and how dare you defame my patriotism and all that stuff. And he just completely undercut the Democrats' efforts to go after Reagan, even though they might have had some merit in it.
Yeah.
But their position was that they abandoned the men in the field, and it's like once you start funding these guys, you kind of have to see it through, which is very similar to the Ukraine arguments the Democrats are making now. But anyway, I'm not defending them, but that's the liberals of this time when this was published. They hated Oliver North because he just took the wind. It's like he popped their balloon, and all the media is like, "Oh, this guy's really pretty." Because that's all they care about is visuals and all these pictures and all that stuff. He's testified at congressional hearings, and he's just like, his attitude is like "f you," but without saying the f's.
Mhm.
Um, any event, so he mentions him as a strict father. I don't even know why you'd mention that. He says he repeatedly in his testimony in Congress, the world is a dangerous place. Well, that was very effective because the world is a dangerous place.
Mhm.
And he's saying that's why we're funding these guys, because these commie bastards out there need to be fought, and we're out here protecting you as like a few good men scene. You want me on that line. You need me on that line, that tower or whatever it was, that wall. And so he was very similar to the Jack Nicholson character in The Few Good Men, if you know that scene. Anyway, so he mentions him because he wants to criticize any effective conservative or military type person.
He essentially lays out after that like what the model is. We've kind of talked
Yes.
about it before.
And I think he's right. I think he's right as far as the description of it. And I can read that basically the model is a traditional nuclear family with the father having, well, I don't know about this, father having primary responsibility for supporting and protecting the family as well as the authority to set overall family policy. He teaches his children right from wrong by setting strict rules for the behavior and enforcing them through punishment. The punishment is typically mild to moderate but sufficiently painful. It is commonly corporal punishment, say with a belt or a stick. I don't know where he gets this because even back then that was not that common, although not completely aberrant. It's lawful in Missouri to use corporal punishment on your children. You just can't torture them. So if you use what's called a switch, and this is cross cultural, and both liberals and conservatives were proponents of this, but especially like in the African American community, if there's a father in the house, it's quite often they'll say, "Go get a switch," and the kids got to go in the backyard and pick out a stick, and that's what they beat you with. Anyway, but the children aren't to be coddled, and the whole idea is to make them independent, self-sufficient people, because when they go out in the world, it's a dangerous place. And I think that part of it, the self-discipline, self-reliance, and respect for legitimate authority are crucial things that a child must learn. And I agree with that summary of conservative philosophy with regard to child rearing. And then a mature adult becomes self-reliant through applying self-discipline and pursuing his self-interest. And only if a child learns self-discipline can he become self-reliant later in life. I think that's all true, and I think that's objectively true.
He also goes
And
on to talk about, human nature, and he's essentially just describing
yes,
simple human nature. He says, strict
yes,
father model presupposes a folk theory that I call folk behaviorism. Says people left to their own devices tend simply to satisfy their desires, but people will make themselves do things they don't want to do in order to get rewards. They will refrain from doing things they do want to do in order to avoid punishment. That's how they view human nature, which I think is generally, how most people view human nature. I don't know if anyone who really fundamentally disagrees with that.
well, dumb people, ignorant people don't agree with that, which I think includes George Lakoff. And he talks about like like the mature children of the strict father have to sink or swim by themselves. I don't know who believes this. Who says once you're an adult? I mean, there are some people that believe you should just cut off your kid at 18, but that's not common conservative thought. He's talking about the extreme edges of what he would consider right-wing behavior. And that, I don't think it's a fair discussion when you're talking about only two major groups. And he's really heavily defining this as a very limited and closed-minded philosophy. And then he goes on to say that, the strict father model is based upon the further assumption that the exercise of authority is itself moral. That is, it is moral to reward obedience and punish disobedience. False. Okay, that's just not true. It's not the authority in and of itself that is moral. And that's his fundamental problem with this entire belief about this strict father morality. Because he tries to adopt a strict parent. I don't know why he calls it father, because the parents have the same philosophy in these relationships. If you believe in this, it's a strict parent that knows that a child is a child and they can't make independent decisions that are inappropriate for their age. So you have to make decisions for them depending on their level of understanding of the world. And so that's why you have rules, and you say, no, because I said so. I'm not going to argue with a 4-year-old about whether or not he can put his hand in the toaster. All right. You're just not going to do it. And if you try it again, I'm going to spank you. And you don't really want to spank him, but it's better to get a pat on the butt than to be electrocuted to death. And so the strict parent theory, the nurturing mother theory that he's going to talk about in the next chapter will be, well, honey, I need to explain to you the theories of electrical conduits. And if you touch this thing, there's electricity in a power plant, which is a terrible carbon emitter. But anyway, it creates electricity. And that electricity goes through wires and through our fuse box. Now, granted, if you stick your hand in there, you'll be shocked for a little bit, but most likely the fuse box will flip over. But we'll set that aside. You might die first before you break the fuse. Any event, I need to tell you and get your understanding and your consent to not put your hand in the toaster. That's the nurturing mother theory. The nurturing father theory is you're going to hurt yourself, stupid. Don't put your hand in the toaster. Have you ever seen anybody put a hand in the toaster? No. Do you know why we don't put our hand in the toaster? Because you get hurt. The toaster is for what? For what? What is a toaster for? Toast. All right. Not hands or forks, like a Devo music video. Anyway, I think I'm going to exceed my limit for rants today.
Probably. He goes on to talk about, to go back to the book a little bit. He talks about competition, I think, is his next big topic, because he says competition is really what makes you self-sufficient. It's sort of what sorts out the weak from the strong, is how
False.
but he says, yes, it is false. But he says, like, conservatives view success like as inherently moral. Like, if you're a successful person, you're a more moral person because you've succeeded in competition. Therefore, you are the better, more strong person, which I don't think people really view that way, especially at this point.
No, it's like, has he met a Christian? Has he met a single Christian in his life? I mean, there are a lot of Christians in this country, and he goes on later in the chapter where he talks about, well, this is an American type of strict father theory because it's different than Europe, and he just asserts that without explaining that, and it's because the American philosophy, political philosophy, the dominant political philosophy has been this independent thought.
Mhm.
The free market is a competition, all that kind of stuff, but it's primarily based upon independence and personal responsibility because we rebelled against England and against the controls of our religion. I mean, as we all know, the original colonists were here because they needed religious freedom because they were being persecuted in Europe, for crying out loud. And so there's a whole undercurrent of that he completely just ignores. And why is it different in America? Because it's not about competition makes you moral. Competition may make you better in doing those tasks, and you'll be able to measure your performance in certain areas, but it's not a morality competition. He thinks he claims that the strict father parent philosophy is a moral competition, and he's just fundamentally wrong with that. And that is one of them several fundamental errors in his description of this conservative philosophy that leads him astray over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think he's partially right in saying that competition is better than no competition for conservatives. The idea that you shouldn't just have everything regulated to an extent where everybody just gets something just because of, they exist. You know what I mean? It's like we do believe that the free market is better than communism, but he's framing it as though we're competing for who is the most moral person, which is wrong.
Yes.
That is not how.
And the theory of the free market is not a morality theory. It is an amorality theory. It has nothing to do with morality. It has to do with effectiveness.
Mhm.
And so the reason why competition is valued by conservative political thinkers is not because it makes us better people in our soul. It's a more effective economic system, period. And that there is no moral basis to say, well, the competition makes us better people in our soul. It makes us more efficient
Mhm.
and more effective. Because if I have a choice between three products, A, B, and C, and A could do it more efficiently and with better quality at a lower price, then B and C are either going to have to improve what they do economically, not morally, but economically, to either compete or they're going to go out of business. And then somebody else maybe will do better than A. Maybe D will come along, he's even better than A. So it's the creative destruction theory of economics, where maybe the competitors go away first, but then a new competitor will come in and even do it better than A. Anyway, so he confuses effectiveness with a moral philosophy, and he just drops this on us. Well, this is a metaphor, it's a strict father metaphor. But then when he goes into these details of it, it's crazy. Like he says, competition is a crucial ingredient in such a moral system. It isn't anything to do with morality. It is that it is through competition we discover who is moral, that is, who has been properly self-disciplined and deserves success. False. I mean, that nobody thinks that.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just not something that anybody believes. But then he does acknowledge people self-disciplined enough to make their own plans and undertake their own commitments and carry them out are more effective people but then he draws all these conclusions from it. It's he says competition is immoral under this philosophy. Well, sometimes it is, but and he says therefore constraints on competition are immoral. Well, sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. There's no overall ruling or philosophy that says these are just always wrong or always not. And quite frankly, morality, the moral view is that it's kind of like distance running, like for me. So I completed a half marathon.
Mhm.
I was technically in a race, right? Because there's other people running the same distance.
Mhm.
I was competing with no one other than me. I mean, I was doing that to see what I can do now at
Mhm.
this age and weight. And I didn't do well, but in any event, but I wasn't competing with these other people, and so he misses that fact that a lot of times you're just trying to improve yourself
Yeah.
with the self discipline and the self sacrifice. You're trying to improve yourself. You're not trying to make yourself better than someone else. If you're doing that, you're not doing it right.
Mhm.
Anyway, I
Yeah,
don't
he
know what
does
it is.
kind of go on kind of at the end here. He is correct, I think. Again, he says, just as the strict father, I'm on page 70, has a duty to
Yeah.
support and protect his family. So those who've risen to the top has a responsibility to exercise the legitimate authority for the benefit of all. He says, this means maintaining order, so sustain and defend the system of authority, use that authority for the protection of those under one's authority, working for the benefit of those under one's authority, especially helping them through proper discipline to become the right kind of people. And then last, exercising one's authority to help create more self-disciplined people, that is the right kind of people for their own benefit, for the benefit of others, and because it is the right thing to do. And I think those are mostly correct statements. Um,
Except for the maintaining order, I agree with, but he says that is sustaining and defending the system of authority itself. And I don't think that, I think he goes a step too far,
mhm.
because if you're a moral person and you believe in this philosophy of self-sufficiency and self-improvement, you're not trying to sustain the entire system, for crying out loud. I don't have an obligation to anybody else.
Because he's confusing like the primary values for the system itself. It's like the job of the people in authority is to defend, justice and what we hold true in society. It's not just to keep, the president in charge. If the president and
Yes.
Congress, start violating the rights of people that we understand as fundamental to everything, then that authority has no right to exist. He's just assuming that the authority itself is the underlying principle, but it's not. It's the things beyond that that give them authority to do things.
Yes. Agreed. And then he segues into like these other topics that are like subcategories, or he says they're subcategories of the strict father morality. And the first one he talks about is moral strength. Again, just like the previous chapters, this chapter is even more pronounced, where he is obsessed with words
Mhm.
without getting the meaning behind the words. He's talking about, well, we talk about being an upstanding citizen, but if you're bad, you're underhanded. So like up is good, bad is down, and they're talking about the fall from grace, and it has this. It says a moral strength metaphor has to do with the conception of immorality or evil. Well, that's fair enough. And then evil is a force, and morality is strength. Well, I agree with that. And he seems to dispute the statement that people are not simply born strong. Moral strength must be built. I mean, I don't know. Does he think that that if we don't contemplate things and we don't work on our own defects and try to shore up our own morality, that we will just stay great? I guess that's what he thinks, because these are pretty obvious concepts, and he's making a big deal about like doing evil is falling, and that's a term, but it's a universal concept that you don't want to fall from a cliff and break your legs, right? So it's a metaphor. Does he not understand what a metaphor is? You're using an example to explain a meaning in a different topic. If you're falling from grace, you're going to fall into bad things, right? Just like if you fall from a cliff, you are going to break your legs or worse. I don't. He's a linguist, isn't he? Does he understand language?
Well, I think his problem is he's not really saying why this matters. He's just pointing out these
Yes.
examples, and it's like, well, yeah, these are good examples. What does this mean for this, category of the strict father? He says, I mean, I guess I mean, I don't know, what the statistics are and how often people talk about, being upright as being a moral thing, but I hear that from people on both sides of the aisle. Like, I don't think
Right.
that's exclusively a conservative thing. I don't know what this means for the strict father morality. This is just common phrases that people use. I think in both systems, understanding morality as being an upright person, people say that, no
Yes.
matter what their core beliefs are.
Yeah. And the nurturing mother philosophy, like you said, are going to use the same terms.
Mhm.
These are not unique to conservative thought or right wing thought or strict father morality or strict parent morality thought. I just don't understand. And then he goes on, now kind of going forward to like 74 for something else ridiculous. He says, ruthless behavior in the name of the good fight is thus seen as justified. Again, has he met a Christian, for crying out loud? I mean, I think the Christian group in America, at least, devout Christians, have this view. Well, especially if he's talking about like the fathers in charge,
Mhm.
he's really talking about traditional Christians, right? And I would be considered a non-traditional Christian under those circumstances because it's like a team effort for most Americans. But I mean, nobody who's talking about morality would say, other than like a Jacobin or some sort of atheist, would say ruthlessness in fight in the name of a good fight is always okay.
Well,
I
it's
don't
exactly
understand that.
what we talked about last season, because he's saying, these people view, like the world is in terms of a war of good against the forces of evil, which must be fought ruthlessly. He says the metaphor entails that one cannot respect the views of one's adversary. Evil does not deserve respect; it deserves to be attacked. And I guess
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with a conservative person? It's exactly that thing we were talking about with the absolutists are more, tolerant in many cases because they
Yes.
recognize that there is a moral framework to work within that isn't just based on their own personal beliefs. They can reason through
Yes.
things. They can have these conversations, whereas somebody who's just dependent on whatever they think is right can't have that same perspective, can't have that same framework saying there might be something higher, therefore we could operate under the same structure. He's just assuming all conservatives just shut out every opinion they don't agree with. And I'm sure there are people who are like that, but that is not a core founding tenet of conservative thought. That is just not how the system works.
Yes. And he goes on to kind of elaborate on that fighting vice is always a virtue, where he says anything that promotes moral weakness is immoral, according to this philosophy. And I've written on the margin, here we go, because he says if welfare is seen as taking away the incentive to work and thus promoting sloth, then according to the metaphor of moral strength, welfare is immoral. Well, welfare is just ineffective. I mean, he confuses ineffective with a moral judgment. Now, granted, if you're just laying about and you're just getting a government check, that is immoral. But that's not necessarily the strongest argument about welfare. Well, like the safety net versus a safety cot or a hammock or something, like or a lounge chair. The fundamental disagreement, number one is the proper role of the government, whether the government should even be involved in that. But then the real argument is nowadays, what works.
Mhm.
It's not really a moral argument. It's what will get people off of welfare back to work.
Well,
You
it's,
know,
it's like, one of the most common arguments I see all the time, one that I think is one of the most persuasive, is that private charitable organizations are much more effective at getting the right aid to the right people. They don't have to pay, so much middle management that all these government bureaucracies do. And it's like, that example is, well, clearly we don't think helping the poor is a bad thing to do. We're looking for the best way to do it. Welfare often is not. There are so many organizations that are much more tailored to the specific needs of the people, exist within their communities, and are able to do it much more effectively, where the
yes,
aid is going directly to the person, not to all the people in the government who are trying to work for whatever agency it is.
yes. And then he goes on the same kind of talk about the moral weakness and specific moral issues, and he says anyone who can't be a moral person is morally weak, which is a form of immorality, and moral people deserve punishment. Well, that's okay to a point, but what about forgiveness and charity? And how about, didn't Jesus say, "Don't judge people," for crying out loud? I'm judging this guy. I'll have to go to confession later for all the evil thoughts I'm having about this knucklehead. And he goes on to say that, and this is his false choice. If the metaphor of moral strength has priority over other forms of explanation, then your poverty or your drug habit or your illegitimate children can be explained only as moral weaknesses, and any discussion of social causes cannot be relevant. That's a false choice. That is not what the philosophy is. Um, I mean, there is this philosophy is not a choice between the successful people are necessarily good. He's arguing as if this philosophy is the old might makes right, that the king is entitled to rule the country and sent down the line.
Mhm.
And nobody has believed that in America, period, since the loyalists went to Canada, right? And he does this a couple of times in this chapter, where he's making the royalist argument as if this is what the conservative thinkers think in our country, and it's exactly not what it is believed. There is not a consensus that might makes right, and if you're in a position of authority, then God put you there.
Yeah.
You know, that's not what people believe in this country. It just isn't.
And then he goes on, speaking of moral authority, that's his next section. And again, he starts off sort of describing it right, and then he just sort of goes
Yes.
off the rails with his examples, considering that he spent, the large part of the introduction talking about, the dangers of stereotyping and things like that. That's exactly what he's
Yes.
doing. But he says, authority, legitimacy of parental authority comes from one, the inability of the child to know what is in the best interests of himself and the family and to act in those best interests. Two, the parents having the best interests of the child and the family at heart. Three, the ability of the parent to know what is best for the child. And four, the social recognition that the parent has responsibility for the well-being of the child and the family. Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
That's how a lot of people
Yes.
view the role of the parent. That is why they have the authority that they do. And he's correct. And then he just kind of goes and he picks on, whatever he wants to pick on and goes off the rails, from there.
Yeah. Well, like the next page, he gives a good summary of that philosophy, but then he says about moral authority. But then he says punishment makes disobedient children in bad children into obedient good children, and he does not understand that really what you're trying to do is you're trying to focus their behaviors on safe and unsafe and productive and unproductive, and you're also giving them moral instruction. But he's saying he's oversimplifying the role of a loving parent when you're trying to discipline a child. You're not saying that you're an evil kid because you took Jimmy's Halloween candy. You made a mistake and you got to be punished and apologize, and give him some of the candy back you didn't eat. But it's not that you're a bad person, but you have to teach children these lessons. It's not fair for you to have all of his candy. And I just don't understand what he's talking about. And he says, the general metaphor looks like the following: a community is a family, moral authority is parent authority, an authority figure is a parent. Wrong. There's no way. We don't believe that they're my parent. Are you kidding me? You start acting like my parent, we're gonna have a revolution. That's what they're doing, really, and that's what Obama was saying. Like from the cradle to the grave. Like the government's my not only my boss but my parent. Well, Biden just said, I think last week, your kids are not just your kids; they're our kids. Yeah, over my dead body. They're not your kids, you freak. If they're your kids, you'd be showering with them. It's a little known reference to his daughter's diary.
Yeah.
As a teenager, she was a teenager and he was having showers with her. How is that not front page news? Meanwhile, President Trump is sitting in a courtroom because his attorney formed a shell corporation and paid some lady, so to speak, money to not go public with allegations, which seems seedy enough. And then he reimbursed the guy a year after the election. That's what he's on trial for. He's not on trial for paying the hush money. He's not on trial for having the affair. He's not even on trial for paying the money to his attorney to pay the money. He's on trial for not stating that he paid the money to pay back the money to keep her quiet. If he would have said in his financial records, hush money payment, they could not prosecute him. He would not be a crime under this theory of prosecution. I'm not literally, that is true. If he would have, because they're saying it's a false record, because it's not just reimbursement for or payment of retainer to attorney is how it was described. It was a hush money payment. If
Hmm.
he would have said hush money payment to Michael Cohen, to Stormy Daniels, to Evan, actually Evan, I don't think was in this one. Um, then it wouldn't be a crime according to Alvin Bragg. Anyway, I
Interesting.
don't know how I got on that rant,
Yeah, I don't know.
but
That was a good
he's on
rant.
trial. He's on trial right now for that made up non-crime thought
Yes.
crime.
But he goes on to
Um,
say,
yes,
like the metaphor of moral authority generalizes the model, the strict father model, to all forms of moral authority. And I think this is where his one of his flaws, one of his many flaws, is
he
exactly
jumps
what
the shark.
yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. We don't view the government as our strict parent. We view that
Yes,
they might have a similar role in, setting boundaries and, enforcing the rules and things like that, like you would with the strict father morality, but you don't view them in the same way. But he's just
yes.
asserting that this is the case for all conservatives, that the government is this form of strict father parent, and then once you're of maturity, you're left on your own. But that's not really how it's conceived.
Yeah, I will say this. I think he has a nugget of truth in here,
Hmm.
in that conservative, the population respond to some themes that are similar to things they've heard in their own home, and they resonate with them because like spare the rod, spoil the child. Those resonate with people that have a different philosophy about raising their kids. But he goes beyond that, so far beyond it that he just defames half the country as
Yeah,
if they're some sort of Nazis.
yeah,
But anyway, so then he goes on to resentment towards illegitimate moral authority. Well, we all have this resentment to any person who claims moral authority that is illegitimate to us. We all resent it. Just like the left resents Trump, and before they resented Trump, they resented Romney. And before them Bush. And now they think those guys are great. I guess I don't know, but but anybody who claims moral authority that you don't think is legitimate, you're going to resent them. And so this is not unique to this philosophy. I don't understand why he thinks this is important.
I mean, he gives a good summary. If you're not acting in the best interest of the citizens, then you're an illegitimate authority. That's true.
Yes.
I mean, it's a very oversimplification, but then it directly counters what he said earlier when, the authority is interested in just preserving the authority. That's how we conceive of a moral system. If it's preserving the authority. Then how can we have resentment towards illegitimate authority if one of the reasons authority exists is just to preserve authority? It doesn't make any.
Yes.
He's just
Right.
these two things cannot go together in a cohesive
Yeah.
system if this is really how they are. And of course, that's just not how they are.
Yeah. And he doesn't explain why. It
Mhm.
doesn't explain why, that there's this resentment towards this illegitimate authority. And this is where he mentions that it seems to be an American innovation. The resentment towards the meddling and intrusion of illegitimate authority. It seems to be a consequence of the particularly American version of strict father family. He doesn't explain why. What is his theory of why American theories are different than, say, France or Germany or England or whatever? He just asserts it. Okay, fine. Then he talks about retribution, but he just has it as a paragraph, and he just talks about, again, balancing the moral books, like a death for a death and the death penalty. And so these conservatives, the people that view this way, think death penalty is better than life in prison. I don't know. He doesn't even talk about effectiveness,
Mhm.
because he says, strict punishment of criminal defenders will deter crime. Crime deterrence is really an effectiveness argument, more so than a moral decision. If you're talking about deterrence, you're not talking necessarily about like you're not talking about rehabilitation. Like you're not trying to make them better. You're just trying to deter them and others from doing the same thing. It's just cause and effect type arguments. But it was a short little blurb. I don't even know why I was in there.
Well, he finally
Uh,
brings up God and talking about the moral order, how things are sort of
yes,
structured. He says, there's a natural order to things. That's how conservatives view things. God is naturally more powerful than people. People are naturally more powerful than animals and plants and objects. Adults are naturally more powerful than children. Men are naturally more powerful than women. And then, of course, he extends that into a hierarchy of moral authority. If you're more powerful, therefore you have moral authority. God has moral authority over people. People have authority over nature. Adults have moral authority over children. Men have moral authority over women. Which is kind of a strange bridge to jump across there. Like just
yes,
because you have power makes you more morally good to have authority. It's again that just idea of might makes right. He's sort of just stereotyping all conservatives as like Machiavelli or something. It's
Yes.
really weird.
Right. Well, it's not even Machiavelli because he didn't believe that the God had ordained it. It's the royalists, the people that believed in the king has moral authority ordained by God, like demigods or
Completely
something. But
missing. It's not just
sorry.
because I'm just saying he's completely missing. It's not just because God is more powerful. It's that if God is a creator, God is an intelligent designer. If there's a plan for things, that is why God is has moral authority over people. It's not just because he's just a more powerful being. I'm sure
Yeah.
that's part of it, but there's more to it than that. He just doesn't understand how theology works, I guess.
Well, yeah, he doesn't understand theology at all because the reason why God is good is not necessarily because he's powerful, is because he's good.
Mhm.
It's so like I often ask people, not often, sometimes ask people, how do we know that God was the creator? What
Mhm.
if the universe was created by Satan? And really, actually, when you look around the world, you start thinking maybe this wasn't designed to cause suffering and pain in our lifetime. But then God is really just goodness, the absence of evil, instead of the Satan being the absence of good. God is the absence of evil. I mean, you can if you have just a power theory of it, then if Satan's more powerful, then Satan is the moral authority by that theory of power, right? So nobody believes that, and of course he doesn't even acknowledge the prevailing theory of the divinity, some divinity of men and women, that we're all children of God. And we all have an inherent value. And he even mentions that the bell curve book, which highly controversial book, because it looks at statistical analysis of IQ scores. If you really want to get blacklisted somewhere, cite the bell curve in any of your papers. It's a bad idea. He mentions it's virtually the real issue is virtually unmentionable. He mentions whether whites are naturally superior to non-whites. Well, he misses the point. If there is a statistical difference in outcomes, it doesn't make them naturally superior, like morally superior. It might make you better at some tasks on average. And he doesn't get that
Yeah.
that success is not. Nobody in the conservative thought, or certainly serious Christians, think that you're morally better if you are successful economically, or you get an A on a test rather than a B on the test. Now you may be slothful or lazy if you don't try and you get a D. But if you've only taken third grade math and you throw you in a calculus exam and you get an F, nobody thinks that you're morally deficient. They just think that you don't know calculus.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Uh,
especially telling,
yeah.
now when all the conservatives are the ones, opposed to big pharma and big tech, and Amazon and stuff like that, where it's like, well, if we did just view success as morally good, we would love all of these companies,
Yeah.
because they are making the most money. They are the most successful. They're dominating their field. But he's just completely missing that that's not a tenet. And then, of course, he brings up Nazis, is where he goes from there. If
Of course.
power equals, moral authority, and that's how you get, Nazism, because, the
Yeah.
white people are more powerful than everybody else, and therefore they are morally superior. Of course, this is what all conservatives think, I guess, or is at least in tandem with the strict father morality in some respect. I don't know what he's.
He's trying to set. We're going to see later arguments. I haven't read the rest of the book, but I'm expecting you're all closeted Nazis, you racist bastards. And he talks about, he's really advocating an anti-Christian. He's asserting an anti-Christian ideal upon his opponents, and it's really just offensive to me. But whatever, that's what he's doing. So then the next section is moral boundaries, because it's going to take us a while to get through this whole thing if we don't get moving. I don't even know why we want to talk about this.
I mean, this one is the one that I was talking about earlier, which I think is especially bad, where he's just saying
Mhm.
essentially that conservatives believe that whatever is tried and true is best, and just
Yeah.
because you move away from the old path, then you're inherently immoral. Well, it's not because you're just trying something new makes you bad. We're not
Right.
opposed to new things. it's an understanding. Like he gives the example of, our son left the church. I can't understand why he turned his back on our way of life like that. Well, it's not an
Yes.
understanding of just because he's trying new things that he's a bad person. It's an understanding of, all of Christianity, where you have, some sort of duty to worship God. It's not that he's just trying something new, and it's just a ridiculous sort of way that he looks at things. Conservatives, because I was thinking throughout this, Christian people would have been the most progressive people, in the Roman Empire. It's that same morality, that same moral system is still there. They would have been advocating for the most change, saying, we don't want to be, persecuted by the Roman emperor. They're moving away from the old path. And that's still the morals that Christians have today, conservative Christians have today, that don't want to be persecuted by an emperor. That doesn't make them, inherently immoral in a strict father system because they want something new.
Well, he's also trying to defend the moral deviance,
Mhm.
because he says, if you're deviant, that really technically means you're just deviating from the norm, and so you're just trying something new, and you're just an innocent babe in the woods, or you're deviating from morality. Okay, so there's two different ways. You could just be acting in an evil way, and that's why we call you a deviant. When you want to stick that into a child, I think you're a deviant, and you're immoral, to put it bluntly. So he's trying to normalize these immoral acts as if, well, it's just a different way to look at the world. It's just a different set of morality, and you shouldn't judge it. Basically, that's where he's setting that up. Then he talks about rights as paths moving forward. He talks about moral and legal boundaries can be seen from two perspectives. One that what is one man's constraint on free movement is another man's protection against encroachment. This is logic by which moral and legal bounds create conflicts of rights. Well, I guess to put it simply, I mean, it really is true about real estate law. I mean, I got my property, and you can't have your cows just trample my corn crop. I mean,
Well, it's
that's
interesting that he brings this up now because we talked about that, in earlier chapters where he's like, you have a right for someone to provide you clean air.
yes,
It's a right away from, somebody encroaching on your clean air. But it's like he understands that, I guess, in this context, but he thinks, in other contexts that it's you have a right to have everything. You have a right to be given everything that you deserve or something like that.
yeah. And then his next chapter, which I had all sorts of notes on, which is the moral essence, because he doesn't even understand what morality is. He's talking about, like, he's asserting that people that have this philosophy about raising your children so that they can be self-sufficient and set up a foundation so they can be moral people. He asserts the view, and he foists the view upon these people as if they believe that people can't change.
Mhm.
And again, going back to Jesus, who befriended prostitutes, and tax collectors, people that were considered to be moral deviants, because they changed, and he forgave them. And that is he just completely misses that idea that if you work hard, even if you're a bad person, you can make up for it. You can be forgiven, and you can improve yourself. That's the whole idea of self-sacrifice, and working on yourself, and helping others, and listening to people. And he says, yeah, this one is his entire his problem with understanding morality is page 88 towards the end. This quote: "What counts as a virtue or vice depends upon the moral schemes that one gives priority to." That is his view in a nutshell, and that is his fundamental uh, uh, error in this book. He believes that, and that is just that's the foundation of his philosophy, and that's why he doesn't give any credit towards the people that believe differently than him.
It's
He's a
especially
moral
bad.
relativist.
He's absolutely a moral relativist, and it's especially bad that he can't even recognize it's not only that he believes it, but he believes that everybody believes this. He just cannot
Yes.
think enough to describe a system where there are actual virtues, where there are things beyond worldly authority that are the basis for authority. Because he's
Yeah.
completely missing the point that conservatives and Christians, people who believe in some sort of higher truth, found all of their moral systems on. He thinks that everything was just come up with and everything's based on these abstract concepts that we've created ourselves, and he can never give credit to a system that is beyond, human power. It's the problem that I've been talking about with linguists as a whole. They're all
Mm,
nominalists. They think everything is
yeah,
created, everything is a construct created by words that we have come up with, and they can't wrap their minds around something that exists beyond the words.
correct. And he uses in this section of the chapter, he talks about on the bottom of 89, or take the proposal to take illegitimate children away from impoverished teenage mother and put them in orphanage and foster homes. So there's always talk about trying to have orphanages again. They used to have orphanages, but it's not an income issue,
Mhm.
right? He's just saying, oh, they're just trying to take these kids away from impoverished people. No, there it's a abuse neglect issue.
Mhm.
If anybody's been in the court system like I have, you've seen some messed up situations that people put their kids in, and I got to tell you, an orphanage would be a much better place for a lot of these children than some of the places that they live in here in Jefferson County or in other areas, where you have like poop on the floor, you got no food, you got mom and dad, if there is a dad around, ODing on heroin, passed out. There was a murder case I was just reading about today in St. Louis, where a 11-year-old girl runs next door to safety because her grandfather had just killed her dad up in St. Louis City, and right in front of her. She's 11 years old. I mean, would she have been? I mean, of course, I'm not blaming her father. Her father's the one who got murdered, but in those circumstances, it's not about you're just trying to take kids away from. So it's a false straw man argument. Nobody's saying, "Oh, poor people shouldn't have their kids."
Mhm.
What they're saying is, maybe an orphanage would be a better situation, a well-run orphanage, than maybe instead of having them abused and neglected constantly for 10 years, right? But that's the argument. I'm not saying that's better. Maybe it is. It's hard because then you have abuses in orphanages, which is a whole other nightmare.
Yeah.
But he puts that in this book as if that's the choice. It's a false choice, and he knows it. He knows it, and he's saying it anyway in writing.
Mhm.
So uh,
Uh,
anyway, yeah,
His,
I'm
his
sorry. Go
next
ahead.
section, I was just gonna kind of move on here.
Yes.
It's like moral wholeness. That's another way that he thinks, this manifest that, we talk about words, you degenerate, moral decay, erosion of moral standards. So the concept of morality being a whole thing, that's how we talk about morality. He talks about that for at length here, brings it up with integrity, the virtue of being morally whole. He says the metaphor of moral wholeness could be stated simply: morality is wholeness, immorality is degeneration. Sure. I mean, if you want to think of it that way, I guess. I don't know if that's really a foundational thing within conservative thought, but he seems to think so. And then he just brings up more examples, kind of continues from there. There's not too much to talk about, I don't think, in these sections.
No, no.
Morale.
Yeah, I got completely turned off by the rest of this nonsense. It was like a whole bunch of insults and meaningless comments. The rest of the chapter is just misstatements of people that disagree with him and purposely misstating their beliefs.
Is his
You
next
know
couple.
that Yeah, one was strict fathers care more about their authority than whether their kids actually are independent and self actualizing, or whatever his words were. And that's just not true. The whole idea is of this philosophy that he correctly describes at the beginning, is so that your kids can be healthy and successful and independent, so that when you die, which we all die, you're hoping they can take care of themselves. He doesn't mention that a single time. I
Well,
mean, at some point your nurturing role is over because you're in the grave, for Christ's sake.
he does go on to say, I'm moving ahead to page 94, where he's talking about
Oh,
moral.
I'm done already. Yeah, I'm done. You can say whatever you want. I've said what
All
I'm
right,
going to say.
well,
Go
I'll
ahead.
pick out a few more points because he does kind of talk about that a little bit, where he says, it's good to be self-disciplined, it's good to be self-reliant. You're supposed to have self-interest to care for yourself. His comments here I thought were insane. He says the link between moral self-interest and free market economics has, of course, not been lost, and advocates of strict father morality. Controlled market economies, whether socialist or communist, impede the pursuit of financial self-interest. For this reason, advocates of strict father morality have seen socialism and communism as immoral. And then he has here this little exclamation point sentence, not just impractical, but immoral. Like he's just now realizing, like it's a novel concept that anyone could think of communism as an immoral system where you're just making decisions for people and ignoring, their concept of free will. These conservatives are crazy. They think communism's immoral. How could they think
Yeah,
such a thing? And it's just like, come on, man.
he must not have a single friend who's a Christian or who's a conservative or who has any sense. I don't know where this guy came from. I mean, because I travel in certain circles, but at least I acknowledge, hey, there's people that think differently than me. Of course, I'm bombarded with it in the media and all that stuff, and in the movies and all that. But I mean, does he not? He doesn't have any concept of any opposing views that might have existed before he wrote this stupid book.
Yeah, and I'll just mention a couple more things. I know you're kind of done, but the next few pages are mostly summaries of what he's talked about. But on page 102, he's talking about like the priorities. He says, there's different concepts within the system. What do we give priority to? He says the priority list is one, the strength group, essentially that Mike makes right. So we prioritize that above all else. Two, moral self-interest, that you should be, self-reliant. And then three, moral nurturance, that you should be educating children. You should be raising them in a way to make them good people. And for some reason, he thinks, the top one for conservatives is that, authority is the ultimate thing. Whatever is strong is best, and then everything else has to flow from there. And I think that is the exact opposite of what it
Yes,
is, that it should,
correct.
in educating and encouraging people to be good moral citizens according
Yes,
to moral virtues that are outside of a moral system. You get the authority from those virtues that you educate them from growing up. He has it entirely reversed, which is insane. And I'm thinking, I have a suspicion that in the next chapter he's essentially going to describe Christian morality and frame it as the progressive morality, saying that the good people, the nurturant parents, are just trying to encourage people to be moral people, and then they can live their lives, according to what they want to do because they've been encouraged in a moral system, completely disregarding how morality comes to exist in that system in the first place, because he's not going to give any credit to any sort of higher truth. But he's just going to say, well, these people are good because they're educating their people in what is moral, and they're not just based on authority. And so he's just
yes.
got this crazy concept of morality that I think is entirely wrong, and will make the rest of this book very fun because this is the foundation of his entire book.
Fun is a strange word to
It'll
use
be
in this
fun for me to
context.
watch what you come up with. Oh. But yeah, I mean that essentially summarizes the chapter. We kind of blew through
Well,
some of those last pages, but
yeah, it's so frustrating because I could I think I could do well, I don't know. I could do a fair job of describing my opponent's views politically, and then I can insult them, but I would at least give them a fair shot at what they actually believe, and then I criticize what they actually believe. But he's misstating the beliefs of his opponents, and it's just so dishonest. I just get fed up with it
yeah.
because he knows it's not true. But he has to he frames it this way so that he can draw the conclusions he wants to draw, which is that his philosophy is morally superior than his opponents, and it's black and white, and that's what we're going to see the next several chapters. So
It's still
I'll look.
very funny to me that he started this book with, I'm going to do my best job to be completely impartial. I don't know what his partial arguments are going to be at the end here, because that is going to be insane. If this is him being impartial, I don't even know what he's going to say.
Yes. Something along the lines of nanny nanny boo boo, stick your head in dog do.
Probably. Probably.
With his thumbs by his ears and waving his fingers. I'm
Yeah.
doing it for you, but our listener cannot.
Yeah, well, everybody could picture it, I'm sure. Yeah. No, this is an interesting book for sure.
Yes, I wish I could say I enjoyed reading it. This is the first one that I'm just fed up with them. But of course, the other books I tended to enjoy, even the ones if I don't agree with a particular thinker or whatever. But this guy's just I'm just ugh.
Oh, we
That's
have like 20 chapters or something to go, so we'll have
that's
plenty.
right. Well, at least the rest of them will be in person, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, next weekend I'm graduating and then I'll be home for the whole summer.
Nice. Yeah, we'll get it done.
Absolutely. Do you have any final thoughts for this episode?
No,
All right. Well, this has been season 8, episode 5. Almost said that backwards. Of Unlimited Opinions. I have been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
have more fun times with George Lakoff next week as he describes, the morally pure,
Mm.
full citizens that are the nurturant mother morality.